Well, good evening and welcome back to Wednesday Night Live, coming to you from Pocatello, Idaho, in the beautiful Portneuf Valley gateway to the great Northwest. I'm glad you could join us tonight. I hope we find some things that will be a little provocative, thought-provoking, however you want to do it, things for you to think about. Realizing that we're from Pocatello, and so many of the things that you may view outside of Pocatello would be of interest in other areas or no interest at all. So just bear with us and we'll see what we can do to keep your gray matter stimulated. And as we do every week at this time, I want to start off by reminding you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center, 478-HOPE. And I sure hope you'll call them. And for those of you outside of Idaho, and yes, for you local viewers, we are on YouTube and we're getting information from all over the country. Not all over the world yet, but who knows? Pocatello may go Pan-Pacific or something. Anyway, we want to remind you as we do about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. The area code here is 208-478-HOPE. And Josh, are we available on that first disc there? We wound up to show that. Okay, this is about 30 seconds. Please watch. God bless Mother Teresa and the good work she did. She was not one of the Clintons' favorite people, although they tried not to show it when they were on camera with her, but Mother Teresa was certainly all about life. And that's what Compassion and Hope is all about, the lives of the unborn, because an unborn baby is just too precious to let it go to waste. All right, so 478-HOPE, 208-478-HOPE. Please call them, see what you can do to help them. You may have seen the baby bottles around at various churches and some other containers at other locations for their annual fundraiser. They don't get money from, they're not subsidized by the feds or any other big group like that. So if you see one of the baby bottles, give liberally. Put a couple bucks, some change, whatever you can. Put a check in there, you know. For $1 a day, how much you could do if you just sent them a check every month for, say, $30, just once a month. $1 a day. My goodness, they can make good use of that. All right, so Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. It's interesting to watch the news. I've actually missed some of the news this week because there have been so many things going on, but the one thing we haven't missed at all is all of the hoopla about Obamacare. And, well, the two things that are really, maybe three, that are really big here in Idaho, right now, is the state exchange, the insurance exchange, which is in reality just an extension of Obamacare. Now, as you may recall, Obama has basically forced every state into a position where if they don't set up their own exchange, they're going to get the money directly from the feds, but they're only going to get this for a short period of time. The feds are going to pick it up for, I think, about 3 years, and then after that, Katie bar the door, the state pays on their own. Now, we in Idaho, you may remember that Butch Otter, a couple of years ago, was right out front. Boy, he had the Idaho flag. He placed it on the hill and he said, we're not going to have any part of this stuff. We're going to fight Obamacare. And God bless his little pointy head, somehow we wound up with this so-called state exchange. And what is the state exchange? Well, it's intended, and I'm sure that it was with good intention, it was intended to allow our state to have sovereignty over the insurance as Obamacare is forcing us. The problem is the money still comes from the feds. They still dictate how it's to be spent. And I think it's 3 years, we carry the load again. So after they front load it with all this money, they tell you, we're going to take care of it. And then in a couple of years, we're stuck with whatever bill they've created. And whether we have an exchange or not is of really no importance. Why is this important? Well, if you've been following this whole business, well, Obamacare in itself is, what can we say about Obamacare? I've got a little cartoon that kind of explains in a way that most of us who are not insurance executives, not clever politicians, not spokesmen for the insurance industry, maybe this gives us a little better idea of why it's going to hurt as much as it's going to hurt. Josh, how are we doing on that? Are we good? take a look at this.
Yeah, I'd like a large coffee with nothing in it.
Okay, that will be $743.
What are you, crazy? I just want a simple coffee.
Well, sir, in order for the government to allow this establishment to sell coffee, there are certain minimal essential coffee benefits that they are required to provide.
Like what?
They are legally required to provide milk, a travel mug, a straw, and numerous other items that the government has deemed necessary for you to have.
Okay, first off, I don't want a straw, I don't want a travel mug, and I don't want any milk in my coffee. I just want a simple coffee.
I don't think you understand. This is for your own safety.
I don't care if you think it's for my own safety. I'm responsible enough to drink coffee of my own. The only thing that I want is a basic coffee, that's it.
Well, the government has deemed it necessary for you.
Thanks, but no thanks. I'm just gonna go to another coffee shop and get exactly what I want.
What is that going to get you?
That's going to get me a coffee.
No, you don't understand. This is a government mandate. Any coffee provider must comply with these regulations or their license to do business will be revoked.
Fine, then it looks like I'm not going to be buying any coffee at all.
Hold on there, not so fast.
What? I'm not going to be purchasing any coffee. It's a free country, isn't it?
Of course it's a free country, or at least we like to tell you that. You're free not to purchase this coffee. However, not doing so will require you to pay 1% of your yearly income as a penalty.
What? I make 50 grand a year. That means I have to pay $500 to this coffee shop to not receive any coffee in return?
Of course you won't have to pay this coffee shop $500. That would be ridiculous.
Oh, okay, good.
You'll have to pay it to the government. And then the next year you'll need to pay $1,000, the year after that $1,250, and then whatever arbitrary number the government wants after that.
Okay, this is some kind of joke, right? Where's the hidden camera?
We had to institute this policy because some people needed coffee, whether they could pay for it or not, and it had to be provided to them. This placed an undue burden on everyone else, so our solution was to place an undue burden on everyone else.
Well, who forced the providers to give away the coffee for free?
Well, the government required it, whether those people could pay for it or not.
So there was a problem created by forcing vendors to provide free coffee to people. And now the solution to that is to force other people to purchase more coffee at ridiculous rates.
Well, you might want to have coffee in the future, so we need to make sure that you pay for it now, whether you actually want it or not. We like to call it the individual shared responsibility payment. It sounds like a contradiction in terms, because it is. Every time you buy coffee, we need to take most, I mean some, of that money and provide coffees free of charge to those who we think need it, and also to people who consistently vote for us. Plus, we can then use that money to purchase a website for millions of dollars that simply won't work.
Wouldn't it make more sense to just let me pick what I want to buy and the provider pick what they want to sell and let us handle it amongst ourselves?
But then how would we pay for programs that you don't want?
There you have it, Obamacare for Dummies, which would certainly include me. Did you watch this at all last week? They were talking about Obamacare, and a question was asked of one of the press guys, something along these lines. Well, you're forcing us to do something or other. He said, no. We're not forcing anybody to do anything. In fact, this is really a choice. A person can choose which insurance they want. Of course, they forget about the part about not all insurances are equal, and so Obamacare, because he likes to equalize everything. Let me just see Obamacare. Obama likes everything to be equal. Because he's a warrior for the middle class. The Obamacare thing is a choice. So now, as I understand it, and I guarantee you I'm not the brightest bulb in the box, but even I can kind of get the picture on this. The way it works is, because the costs of this are so prohibitive, and if you're in certain earnings categories, you're going to pay more. So the less you earn, the more will be subsidized by the government, whoever those guys are. It used to be us, you and me, but it maybe has changed now. I guess it's the Obamunists and their buddies. But it'll be subsidized. So actually, If you're a guy trying to raise a family and you happen to be working at a low-income job, or if you're a starving student, you're working your first job at $7.25 an hour minimum wage, well, you're in a category that Obamacare is going to pay for it for you. Now, if you raise your status in life, if you climb that ladder of success, well, you're going to be penalized for that, and you'll have to pay more. But it's a choice. You see how that works? So now this guy had the audacity to say, when he was asked about this, he said, well, these people now are going to have a choice. They'll be able to stay home more with their families. They'll be able to do things. They'll get out of that job that they've been stuck in, that they really wanted to leave, but they couldn't do anything about it because of the insurance. Now they'll be able to leave that job. Wow, aren't we lucky to be under an Obamanist regime where they're going to do this for us? You don't ever have to have any desire to get ahead because the Obamanist will pay for it. No, wait a minute, that's the government. No, that's you and me. It gets so confusing. Yeah, well, so anyway, here's the legislature of the state of Idaho in the House of Representatives, House Bill 248. If you like reading minutia, this is actually this is from the first session of the 2013 first regular session, so it was last year when this was put forward. But House Bill 248, and I'm going to just read just 4 or 5 lines from the purpose of intent. This is under 41-6102, purpose and intent. It is the public policy of the state of Idaho to actively resist federal actions that would limit or override state sovereignty under the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Through this legislation, the state of Idaho, this legislation being this House bill, the state of Idaho asserts its sovereignty by refusing to surrender decision-making authority over health care issues, which are matters appropriately left to states and individual citizens. Boy, that sounds good. We're going to take the bull by the horns. We're going to be the masters of our own destiny. The problem is we're not the masters of anything. The money still comes from Obamanists and the feds, and we might be allowed to open up some places to buy the insurance that they approve, but really, in the end, they're still running the show. So instead of really truly inserting our sovereignty and saying, nope, we're nullifying any contact with you, we've knuckled under, and guess who was one of the prime movers on this piece of legislation? Representative Kelly Packer from Legislative District 28B. Kelly Packer's an interesting woman, very, very upwardly mobile, very, she wants to get ahead. And she portrayed herself when she was running as kind of a people's candidate. I'm from Southeast Idaho. I'm for you guys in Bannock County and District 28B, and I'm here to do what you want me to do. You're sending me to represent you. Well, a whole lot of us here in Southeast Idaho, or at least in Bannock County, really don't want this Obamacare, really don't even want an exchange, but she decided we're going to get it anyway. She and Jim Guthrie, the senator from the same area, have been prime movers, but since it was a vote before the legislature, we'll just put that hat on Kelly Packer, who is up for re-election. Last week I introduced you to our friend Lance Earl, who is running for that seat. I'm going to urge you every week to vote for Lance Earl in the primaries. We need a guy with his integrity and his desire to truly do the people's business. Get him in there, get her out. By the way, it's kind of an aside, but maybe we'll get to it as we go along. Kelly Packer also recently showed another dimension to her self-minded and self-purposefulness. I don't know if I made that up or not. Well, under the Obama administration, you can make up any word. And whatever you want it to mean, that's what it means. Didn't that start with the Clintons? What does is really mean? Anyway, Kelly Packer, so she's been a prime mover and shaker for the insurance exchange. Interestingly enough, a lot of the people putting money into her war chest are insurance companies. Who would have thunk it? She used to be a professional insurance person, whatever the title is, at one of the local doctors. It was her job to do the insurance stuff. Looks like the nut didn't fall far from the tree, insurance-wise. Now, she did another thing recently that is, it's a head scratcher. Last year, during one of the, what is getting to be a regular, almost weekly thing now, when the homosexual crowd were up in Idaho, in Boise, and were one of their Add the Words campaigns, or whatever it was, Kelly Packard came on board to support the homosexual agenda as it was being presented, which surprised a lot of people because of her faith, her background, whatever. I think a lot of people were as surprised as they were when Steve Brown was the swing vote to get the local ordinance shoved down our throats here locally. I don't think people expected that from Kelly Packard, and yet she was supportive. Now, she was quoted in a newspaper, and I believe it was in Oregon, might have been Washington, it was along that side, and they quoted her as having said something that was basically supportive of the homosexual agenda. A number of people, my wife included, who we know Kelly, and we were kind of surprised. It didn't seem to fit in where we thought her mindset would be. We thought she would give it more thought. So some people contacted her and said, Kelly, we read this thing in whatever that paper is, and it seemed to indicate that you're supporting the homosexual movement here in Idaho as far as gay marriage and all that other stuff. And she said, oh, no, I was misquoted. Really? Okay. It was taken at face value by those who were questioning it. Last week, or was it earlier this week? I lose track. We had the people were in front of the legislator, the committee, 16-member committee, who were hearing people who wanted to speak out about the law here in Idaho, whether or not gay marriage and all that was to be accepted. I've heard that there was something like 300 or 400 people that spoke before them. I listened to, I guess it was a week ago today, I listened to about an hour and a half or 2 hours of that. And it was this, I think I shared this with you last week now that I recall. It was basically the same crowd that came here to Pocatello to ram this through to get this ordinance on the books here. Same stories that have absolutely no empirical evidence, no data to support any of the things were made. It was all of it anecdotal information with absolutely no evidence to many of the things we're talking about, the horror stories that were brought up. Well, when it came to a vote, the vote was 11 of the committee said, let's push this bill forward. And the bill is Assembly Bill 426 and 427. And you might want to look those up. Assembly Bill House Bill HB 426, HB 427. And basically what these bills do is they protect the rest of us from the homosexual agenda that would make us criminals if some homosexual person accused you as a business person, as a member of the clergy or anything else, of denying them their rights because they are LGBTQ, and sometimes they throw A in there, and pretty soon the whole alphabet will be in there. But if they're LGBTQ, they can accuse you under this local ordinance, which they would like to see become a state law. They can accuse you of being a homophobe or whatever they want to call you this week, and you have to defend yourself. Well, of the 16 people listening, 11 people said, let's let AB 427 go ahead. 426 is, I believe, it's more like a companion bill, so they kind of go together. Only 5 people voted against it. Now, when Kelly Packard, and she was one of 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats, well, you expected that, and 2 Republicans, and one of those Republicans was Kelly Packard. When Kelly was asked about this, she said, oh no, I didn't vote no, which was against it. She said, I voted to send it back to committee. Well, when you send a bill back to committee, unless there's somebody really pushing hard, that goes in the bottom drawer and it stays there and it's dead. That's how you kill a bill that you don't want to have to deal with. You send it back to committee and it dies there. Well, fortunately, there are other people who feel strongly enough that you and I, just average Joe Dokes, the cab driver, the baker, the florist, and all the horror stories we've been hearing, that you and I, as well as professionals, doctors, lawyers, ministers, are protected against spurious allegations. And wouldn't you know, Kelly Packard, who has been one of the major forces behind this insurance exchange, who was against it before she was for it, happens to be one of those who really stood up now and said, no, let's send it back to committee. And in other words, killing it. Well, what do you think happened? Now, this is an interesting side. What was that woman's name that, it'll come to me in a minute. The woman who, Lefevre, openly homosexual. She used to be in the Senate. She's no longer in the Senate. She and 43 other people, she and 43 other people were arrested, and actually they were cited. Nobody went to jail, I don't believe, because they stood in the doorway at the hearings and weren't going to let people through. Now, people could get through in other ways, but this was symbolic. They did so with the idea that they were going to get arrested. Well, Lefevre, I think she says, has been encouraging all of the homosexual community to send candy and flowers to Kelly Packer in appreciation for her standing with them against those of us, I guess, who are considered as meanies, because we want to have some protection for you, me, the rest of us. So isn't that ironic now that Kelly Packer is receiving, and it was interesting to see the little tweets and emails, or whatever you want to call them, that were going out. I've sent mine. I'm going to send mine right away. I'm looking for the right candy now. All these people who want to send candy and flowers to Kelly Packer for being one of 5 people who voted to send this back to committee. So now I guess we have 2 Republican champions for the homosexual community. Steve Brown, who we haven't seen much of Steve recently, on our city council, and now we have Kelly Packer, Legislative 28B, 2 local champions for the homosexual community. So things are looking up for the homosexuals being able to force the unthinkable on the rest of the community, at least from these 2 people. Well, all right, so I kind of sidetracked a little bit because I wanted to talk to you about this. Now, what happens when you get stuck with a law that you really didn't want it and then you're kind of stuck with it? Well, fortunately, and this goes back to the Obamacare kind of thing, fortunately, if you were wise enough when you bought your last car to get the trunk monkey, you may have something to come to your rescue. Josh, are we good to go? Take a look at this.
On my way into work, I spilled hot coffee on my lap, and I lost control of my car.
Shock advised. Stand clear.
No. For the most part, I'm glad that I bought a car with the trunk monkey.
The Trunk Monkey, a life-saving idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group.
I love that trunk monkey, and we have a number of trunk monkeys to introduce you to over the next several weeks, but that's obviously intended for a certain purpose, but kind of goes to the idea of suppose you're getting help you don't even want, like the Obamists' idea of insurance, that you don't even want it. I don't know about you, but I already had a pretty good insurance plan. I pay for it. I was willing to pay for it, but it's a pretty good plan. Of course, I'm on Medicare, like people over 65 are stuck with, but my Plan D that covers the other stuff has been pretty good. So I didn't want Obamacare. And isn't it interesting how few people really do want it, and how many people are still left out in the cold? So sometimes you can get medical care like the trunk monkey that you didn't even want, probably didn't even need. So we'll get you some more trunk monkey stuff. Let's get to a little bit more current events. Well, this is current events. The Obama thing is always current. It's the gift that just keeps on giving, and the role of, pardon me, some of it. Have you noticed that the Republican Party locally here doesn't look like a Republican Party that we always thought that they were? They're not with a small r as in Republican values. It's capital R, like, can I get reelected, and who do I have to kiss up to? Well, apparently Steve Brown on the City Council and Kelly Packer, Legislative 28B, apparently they think that the way for them to go is to kiss up to the homosexual community. Well, we'll see how that works out for them. Well, let's go to some of the letters to the editor. And this is actually an old letter. I've been holding on to some of these because I wanted to read them, and it seemed like every week, like last week we were fortunate we had Lance Earl here. Next week we're going to have an in-studio guest who we're going to introduce, Dennis Spencer. And Dennis, to a lot of you, he doesn't need any introduction, but Dennis is running for District 2 on the County Commission. And Dennis is going to be my guest next week. We'll kind of introduce him to you up close and personal, you know, and talk a little bit about what he hopes to achieve. But each week, I want to get to some of these letters to the editor. I keep getting caught farther and farther behind, and then other things get in the way, so I'm going to try to get caught up a little bit. Now, I'm going to remind you, I know you're probably as tired of it as I am, because every day you pick up the newspaper, well, right in the front page of the newspaper again, LGBTQ, whatever it was. And the only other thing, the banner today was Pocatello is going to get a mosque. How's that going to work out for you? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. But every day, the Idaho State Journal is the water boy for the LGBTQ community. Every day. Now, we haven't heard a whole lot from Mike O'Donnell recently, who appeared for a while to be the self-appointed water boy, but he works for the newspaper, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he was carrying water at their behest. But certainly the newspaper, the only printed media we have in Bannock County of any size, and we don't really know how big they are. I've noticed that at least once a week now they're in one or more markets giving papers away. Obviously they're trying to get people to buy subscriptions. You know, a fool and his money are soon parted. And I say that, I guess I'm a fool in my money because I am a subscriber, but I don't really have any choice. I subscribe to the newspaper because I want to have things that I can discuss with you that are topical, that are going to affect all of us. But I know that you've got to be as tired as I am of every day seeing something else coming from LGBTQ. Either the newspaper generates it, or they pick up an AP, or they get Susan Matsura, who is a driving force in the local community, or somebody else that wants to enlighten us or further devolve into paganism, whatever you want to say. Well, we're a little bit behind, but let's get caught up a little bit. Now, this is an older thing. It's almost 2 months old, a little more than that. But these are letters to the editor. This is a short one. And this was actually December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. Have you noticed how people are not, this last December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, there was very little discussion about Pearl Harbor Day. In the past, we've had military rights, or whatever you want to call them, recognizing, remembering Pearl Harbor Day. Last year, we lost the last local survivor. I believe he was the last local survivor, retired Chief Petty Officer Chris Haramy, who was at Pearl Harbor during that attack. And you don't see them. It seems like the schools are not teaching our young people about our history. Something as magnanimous, or something so big, magnanimous not the word, but something so big as that. The schools aren't talking about it. Today my granddaughter came home from school. I picked her up, and I don't recall exactly what the question was. My wife asked her. She said, "Oh, what day is today?" And she said, "Oh, let's see, today is, and I just lost the name there. The guy with the theory of evolution, Darwin. Today is Darwin's birthday." Now, she goes to a Christian school. She's not in the secular environment, so we would have expected that she might have been told that today is Lincoln's birthday, or President's Day, rather. It's not Lincoln's birthday. Today is President's Day. No, the thing that she was told today is it's Darwin's birthday, which came as something of a surprise to me coming out of a Christian school. I guess they're not even teaching kids about President's Day anymore. Well, anyway, so this is a letter written last December 7th. You know, I go off on these little rabbit warrens sometimes, forgive me. It says, "So let me try to understand this. If I'm against Obama and his policies, then I'm a racist. However, if I'm for Allen West, what does that make me? If I'm supportive of the Tea Party, which, by the way, is a defender of the U.S. Constitution, then I am unpatriotic. If I follow Fox News in lieu of the other major left or left-leaning networks, then I'm a threat to national security. When I joined the military, I took an oath to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. When I retired from the military, I was never released from that oath. So, in accordance to some of the inputs to the ISJ, I am a racist, terrorist, and anti-patriot, and an extreme threat to national security. It's not bad for an old defender of the U.S. Constitution, is it? By the way, I'm also totally against illegally coming into this country." And that was written by Leo G. Wren of Chubbuck. And Leo, many of us vets feel pretty much the same way. Do you remember a few years back, and I realize it's old history now, when Janet Napolitano, yes, defender of the borders, who made the statement, what was she? She was the national security director, whatever the title is. Boy, they have a lot of big titles in Washington, all of them very expensive and high-priced. She said that veterans were a threat to the United States of America. A lot of us didn't really think that was a valid statement. She's a representative of the Obamianists, and she very blatantly said that GIs, and veterans like you and me, are a threat to the United States. Pretty blatant. And you wonder, where does it stop? Because it doesn't seem to be. We're still waiting to get the lowdown on Benghazi. What are we going on, a year and a half now? All right. Now we're going to talk, because these are letters to the editor, we're going to cover on, well, it's hard for us to get around this. Excuse me. As I mentioned before, it's kind of hard not to talk about this because every day there's something in the paper about the LGBTQ and so on. And let me just remind you, I'm going to read this to you until we both have it memorized. It is absolutely imperative that you remember this because this is the crux of the whole matter. This isn't the end product, but it certainly shows you how they're going to get to it. Quote, "The greatest single victory of the gay movement over the past decade has been to shift the debate from behavior to identity, thus forcing opponents into a position where they can be seen as attacking the civil rights of homosexual citizens." And this was from the Homosexualization of America by homosexual activist Dennis Altman. Now, why do I read that? Well, because it's important that we remember what the whole homosexual movement is about. We're going to talk about that as it has to do with Islam in a minute. And the first thing I thought when I saw the title of the banner headline on today's paper that we're going to get this new mosque, and I thought, wonder what the local homosexual community thinks about that. Wonder if there'll be any of them up in arms about that, since the Islam is notorious for beheading homosexuals, just like Russia is notoriously anti-homosexuals. Wonder how the local homosexual community is going to react to a mosque being put in here in Pocatello. Well, anyway, let's get back to the letters. Now, this was, here again, we're back a couple months. This was December 31st. And I read, in his recent column, Mr. Hitchcock defended the so-called anti-discrimination ordinance on grounds that a state court has found a similar ordinance constitutional. That is totally irrelevant for a couple reasons. First, a court finding an issue as being constitutional or not does not make a law right. The courts have badly twisted our Constitution to affect their social change agendas. Remember that slavery was held up as constitutional through the Dred Scott decision, and the atrocity of abortion on demand was established as a right through some kind of vague penumbra by an activist Supreme Court. This did not make these issues right, except to moral relativists who seek to remove the concept of right and wrong from society so they can implement their own elitist utopia. The second reason is that those of us who oppose this law, the ordinance, are not seeking to remove it through the court system. We are simply exercising our right as citizens to force a review of the law by the voters because we feel it is a bad law. Furthermore, we are not opposing it strictly on religious grounds. There are a number of issues that are clear indicators that this is a bad law, not the least of which is the example cited of the Arizona photographer who was asked for his services for a gay union that he held as an immoral use of his services. In a sane society, the gay couple would have simply sought out the services of someone who had no moral obligation to their request, and everyone would have gone about their own business. However, because of that local ordinance, the photographer was criminalized for his moral values, and his rights of freedom of association were trampled on. I believe once the issues from this ordinance are put up for discussion, the voters will see that this is not a case of gay bashing or hatred, but simply reasonable opposition to a bad law, and will overwhelmingly pass the referendum against it. If the City Council were at all reasonable, they would rescind the law themselves to save the cost and turmoil of an election, then review the issue with all stakeholders involved. Obviously, there was not full representation of all views on the Human Rights Commission that drafted the law in the first place, or this ordinance would never have made it to the council agenda. And that's written by George Swenson here in Pocatello. And it's well said, George. Bad law is still just that, bad law. Now we're getting a little more current. This is from January 7th. We're still reading from your letters. The governor is right. The traditional definition of marriage is worth defending. If people involved in a homosexual relationship can said to be married, then marriage has no essential connection to children, and vice versa. Children become a mere option, then an interference, then a burden. If the courts rule that two lesbians and their cat have the same status in law as a father and mother and their children, then the courts are blind to the future and welfare of society. And that was submitted by Monty Ledford of Aberdeen. That's one of the fallacies of this whole homosexual agenda, whether it has to do with this ordinance or so-called gay marriage, is that there are equations, that there are equal status things here, that homosexual marriage has an equal standing with historical marriage. Trying to couch my words here because no matter what I say, the homosexual community is going to be upset. And I understand that. They have an agenda. They are trying to fill that last card into their straight. They're getting pretty close to it seems. So I understand that they're not going to be too happy, and they're looking for some way to slam me. Boy, I'm getting slammed regularly on the internet. An interesting slam today from, well, we'll get to that one. All right, this is from Fox News, January 14th, and it's titled, All Wrong. In California, girls can use urinals in boys' restrooms. I have to tell you this, it's a little anecdote, but it goes right to this whole idea of girls using urinals in boys' restrooms. Try to get a picture of this. Many years ago, we had a lovely family lived across from the street from us. They had 3 children. I think it was 2 of them were young. This was a second or third marriage for the woman, so she had an older daughter, and then she had a couple of younger children. The little girl was quite precocious, and she had to test the boundaries on everything. Well, one day, the older brother, and I think the older brother might have been 5, maybe even 4, and he was in the front yard, and he had found out that he could just about, let's say, scent trail anything. He was lifting his leg, figuratively speaking, on the flowers, on the trees, and it was, my wife called me to the window. She said, Ralph, you've got to see this. A lot of little kids go through this. And he was out there doing an aim and shoot in the front yard. Well, his little sister, a year younger than him, not to be outdone, saw what her brother was doing, leaned back and tried to do the same thing, and with obvious repercussions. She couldn't scent mark the neighborhood like her older 4-year-old brother or 5-year-old brother could. But it was so comical to see this little girl she was a little girl. She hadn't learned this yet, and she couldn't understand why her brother could do this. Well, she ought to be able to do it too. Well, that kind of brings us fast forward in a different way. All right, so here we go. This is an article by Dr. Keith Ablow. I don't know who Dr. Ablow is. Let's see if we've got anything on the footnote about him. He's a psychiatrist and a member of the Fox News Medical A team. And I don't think I've ever seen Dr. Ablow, even though I do watch Fox. Anyway, he's a psychiatrist. All right. So Dr. Ablow writes, as of January 1, students in California public schools have been able to choose whether to use the boys' restroom or the girls' restroom, as well as the girls' locker room or boys' locker room, based on whether they feel female or male, not whether they are anatomically female or male. That's right. Governor Jerry Brown, we used to call him Governor Moonbeam, Governor Jerry Brown of California signed a bill that took effective January 1 that tells kids from kindergarten on that they should decide what they believe their gender identity is and act accordingly. The legislation also allows students to choose their sports teams based on whether they sense they are boys or girls, not whether they were born male or female anatomically. I know that other psychiatrists may well disagree, and I know that LGBT activists will criticize me, but I believe that allowing this choice is profoundly destructive, psychologically, to all students, including the ones who identify themselves as a transgender. The mere fact that teachers and administrators will have to explain to kindergarten and first grade students that they might see girls in the boys' restroom or boys in the girls' locker room, but that those really aren't kids of the gender they appear to be could, and here data is sorely lagging, could do harm to their own developing sense of self by suggesting to them that their gender is fluid, that it well might change for them too, and that they should be on the lookout for signs that they want to switch. That's correct, and I expect to continue getting death threats and calls for me to be fired from my academic teaching position for saying so, because I've endured both. I believe that children have enough to deal with as they struggle to feel comfortable with their bodies, with the notion of privacy and with later changes involving puberty, without urging them to grapple with the notion that their souls may have been born into the wrong bodies. What's more, I don't believe we have definitive data, although many psychiatrists with very impressive credentials who seem to mean well assert that we do. We don't have sufficient data that any male or female soul has ever in the history of the world been born into the wrong anatomic gender. Let me put it more clearly. I am not convinced by any science that I can find that people with definitively male DNA and definitively male anatomy can actually be locked in a cruel joke of nature because they are actually female. And I believe that telling 3rd grade or 7th grade or 10th grade children, adolescents or teenagers, that this issue is settled to such an extent that they should feel comfortable with females walking in and seeing them urinating or pulling their pants down to change into football gear is a lie that can steal their ability to trust adults, shake their faith in any form of reality, traumatize them by shaming them, and kindle waves of complete unnecessary anxiety related to whether they should be doing some sort of emotional inventory to determine whether they're really going to turn into men once and for all, or find out that they've been suppressing the truth that they're actually women. I don't see anything but toxicity from this notion of a person with female anatomy feeling free to use the urinal in the boys' restroom while a boy stands next to her and uses one too. Governor Brown is one of the liberal politicians in the world who wants to sell people on the idea that he loves freedom when he is actually addicted to disempowering people. And shaking the certain knowledge in truth, certain knowledge in boys and girls of whether they can count on not being seen naked by the opposite gender, not to mention whether they are themselves actually the gender they thought they were, is a powerful, devious, and pathological way to weaken them by making them question their sense of safety, security, and certainty about anything and everything. That way they're less likely to be in a position to want to be autonomous. That way they'll keep on thinking they need people like him to build them a government that suffocates them and deprives them of liberty. A campaign in California called Privacy for All Students is now seeking to put the Choose Your Bathroom law to a public vote on the November ballot. I hope they succeed, and I hope it is repealed. They should add another recall vote on Governor Brown at the same time. He survived one in the past and should not have. I know exactly what I believe, partly because I grew up at a time when liberal politicians weren't as brazen about trying to erode my sense of self. And I believe to the core, unshakably, that Governor Jerry Brown is a threat to children in California and a threat to children everywhere. And that's by Dr. Keith Abloh, a psychiatrist. You rarely see anything written, even by people who may believe this way. You rarely see them writing it because it takes a lot of courage to stand out there in front of this mass of information that is coming at us all the time. And if you think for one moment, I heard a pundit say that, well, you know, the President of the United States is really kind of a figurehead. It doesn't matter what he thinks. He really doesn't have anything. He doesn't really encourage the nation. He doesn't really get the nation to go along. Oh, really? Well, you know, Clinton kind of bowed out when the homosexual thing was under fire in his administration. He kind of moved more toward the center and came up with don't ask, don't tell. This current man in the White House has done more to damage the psyche of the United States of America than any president in history, and certainly with the relevance of what defines a male or a female, a man or a woman, a girl or a boy, or homosexuality and non-homosexuality or heterosexuality. He has had a more destructive effect on our nation's grappling with this very, very difficult thing than any other congressman, senator, or president in history. He has been, in a word, a disaster in his so-called leadership. And in this one, I don't care if he is leading from behind. People listen to the president because he has the mainstream press and the homosexual community, which has lots of money, lots of influence. They have Hollywood as part of their darlings. They have there's a guy in Colorado who is a billionaire who pours tons of money into the homosexual agenda. And so when the president says that we're doing away with don't ask, don't tell, now anybody can serve at any time, when he says that, well, you get the picture. Let's move on. So, January 15th. Add the words, this is in the Boise Weekly by Jessica Murray. When Susan Matsura's son came out at the age of 17, she said to herself, we live in Blackfoot, Idaho. Could we live in a place where it would have been more difficult to come out? I don't think we could, we're quoting. Since her son came out almost 10 years ago, Matsura said she watched him face discrimination in Blackfoot and Boise before he ultimately moved to Seattle with his boyfriend. Matsura watched the Idaho legislature time and again refuse to add the words sexual orientation and gender identity to Idaho's Human Rights Act. In front of nearly 1,000 people, other sources say hundreds, and I recently saw a photograph, I guess it was a tape, of that rally in Boise, and I would estimate, and I just go back on my years in the past where I had to estimate crowds, and I would say the crowd probably numbered about 300. So it wasn't just a few dozen like one reporter had said, but it was far from 1,000. Even moving in and out and coming back and forth, it was far from 1,000. But I digress. In front of nearly 1,000 people, while apologizing for her trembling voice, Matsura talked about being the mother of a gay son. Quote, I love him and I will protect him, Matsura said. That's why I've worked so hard on this issue. History has shown us that you can change attitudes by changing laws. Emily Jackson Edney, co-chair of Add the Words Idaho, said the rally was to get people engaged, excited, and maybe even angry. Quoting from her, when gay or lesbian people come out, they don't come out just to crawl back into the closet. They come out to live as they truly are, said Jackson Edney. A working gay woman has to guard herself. If a coworker asks her what she did this weekend, she can't say, well, my partner and I did this, because if someone at her firm has a moral objection to that, she could be fired. And there's no recourse. She can't put pictures of her family on her desk like everyone else. She can't bring her partner to the company Christmas party. That's not quality of life. Jackson Edney said she wouldn't be able to end such discrimination without the help of straight allies like Matsura. Well, and Matsura certainly is a driving force locally. She's the chair of the Human Rights Commission, or whatever it's called, here in Pocatello, and she's been able to use that as a bully pulpit to make her point. And the city council has listened to her. Part of the city council that was listening is gone, and well, we'll see what happens in the next city council election. All right, this is from the Illinois Review, Crosswords of the Conservative Community. Paxton Bed and Breakfast braces for more legal challenges over same-sex weddings. This is from Paxton, I think that's Paxton, Illinois. Paxton small business owner Jim Walder awaits a decision from Illinois Human Rights Commission pertaining as to the fate of his bed and breakfast. A lesbian couple from Mattoon filed a complaint against the Timber Creek Bed and Breakfast in 2011 after Walder told them he doesn't host civil union ceremonies based on his religious beliefs. Don't for a minute think that the ordinance protects you if you have religious beliefs. Now Walder says he expects more legal challenges because he will hold the same policy on same-sex weddings. The idea that free people can be compelled by law to compromise the very religious beliefs that inspire their lives as the price of citizenship is a chilling and unprecedented attack on freedom, said Tom Brecha, President and Chief Counsel of the Thomas More Society. But while Illinois new same-sex marriage law allows churches to refuse to marry some same-sex couples, business owners are not exempt from the law if they hold religious values that do not recognize same-sex marriages. House Bill 426 and House Bill 427. Look them up and read them. Refusing to host a gay marriage or a civil union is a violation of Illinois' non-discrimination law, the ACLU argues. Businesses may not reject customers that do not fit within their religious beliefs. Just this week, an Oregon couple that refused to bake a cake for a gay wedding was ruled against by a similar state commission, and now the two face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, forcing them to close their small bakery storefront and work from home. The investigation concludes that the bakery is not a religious institution under the law, and that the business's policy of refusing to make same-sex wedding cakes represents unlawful discrimination based on sexual orientation, said Charlie Barr, a spokesman for the Bureau of Labor and Industries. The News Gazette says because Paxton's Walder is opposed to holding civil union ceremonies at his bed and breakfast for religious reasons, his attorney, Jason Craddock, said it would be a violation of Walder's First Amendment rights if the Human Rights Commission were to side in the Waltons' favor. If that happens, Craddock said, the decision would be appealed, and if the decision is still upheld, litigation would be the next step. Could a small business ever reject servicing an event with these standards? Only if the reason for the rejection is nothing to do with sexual orientation, gender, age, disabilities, or ethnic background, according to Illinois law, and more to come. And this is exactly the position we're finding ourselves in here in Idaho. This is just 2 weeks ago. Your letters, this is called Human Rights Statute. There is more involved than adding just 4 words, gender identity and sexual orientation, to the Idaho Human Rights Statute. Categories so ill-defined and so arbitrary and self-determined are a recipe for constant accusation and litigation. That's from Monty Ledford of Aberdeen. Well, this one, this isn't too long. We'll get to this. Now, this is from February 6th, your letters, again in the Idaho State Journal, titled Discrimination. Pocatello's local ordinance that prevents discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in housing, employment, and public accommodations was established in response to the needs of our community. Really? I put a question mark there. Following our 2 stories shared with me, neither story was reported, substantiated, or investigated by authorities because there are no legal protections for the individuals. Keep that statement in mind. A female ISU student renting an apartment in a house near campus and had been there 3 months. According to her, remember this is anecdotal, the landlord, who did not live on site, came around at about 10 p.m. He was agitated when he arrived and used his key to enter the apartment without knocking. Now, there's a point here. Remember, the landlord used his key and entered without knocking. This is absolutely illegal. And if this had happened, Pocatello Police Department should have been summoned. The law is clear. Landlords may not enter the dwelling without permission. There is already a law against illegal trespass. The landlord could be levied treble damages for this. And you can check this out. Go to Idaho State Code Chapter 3, Forcible Entry and Unlawful Detainer. Fib, at least unsubstantiated anecdote number 1. He asked her if she was a lesbian, but did not wait for an answer, and told her if she was not out by the next night, he would throw her belongings out. Property law requires a 30-day notice to quit. Once again, there is already statute covering this. She moved in with friends and did not intend to return for the next semester. Number 2, a young man stated that he worked in a small business near ISU. He was not sure how his employer discovered he was gay. He reported that when he went to work one morning, his boss, using several expletives, told him not to return. He never received his final paycheck and was afraid to go back and speak with him. Really? If either person had reported the incidents, neither would have legal recourse. That's what the author is saying. Of course, this is patently false in the case of the renter, as any good attorney could tell Ms. Matsura. Each could have faced further trouble if their families or friends did not know they were gay. They were afraid. Well, if they marched in the Pride Parade or they're part of the Project Pride or whatever, why would they be embarrassed or ashamed to tell their folks how proud they are of what they have decided to live, the lifestyle? Those who oppose Pocatello's law often cite court cases involving businesses in Colorado, Oregon, New Mexico, and Washington State that refuse to serve same-sex couples who want to get married, bakeries, photographers, and florists. Our ordinance was put in place based on the needs of Pocatello residents. Again, I say, really? The law provides basic protections in housing, employment, and public accommodations. Those things that provide, they're talking about the ordinance, those things that provide life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this was written by Susan Matsura. My comment would be that it's too bad Ms. Matsura doesn't know a competent attorney, so she could have referred those people to see him or her. This is the kind of blatant misuse of rhetoric that went on at the Idaho State House last Wednesday. anecdote after anecdote with nothing to substantiate it, these stories. And you look at this woman says that she was her domicile was invaded at 10 o'clock at night by the owner, and she had no recourse. Are you kidding me? Something's missing in there. And this young man said he was afraid to even go back for his paycheck. Really? I find myself incredulous on both of these. But again, I say, maybe Ms. Matsura could find a competent attorney and refer these to that attorney, because these are obviously, even I as a non-attorney know that you can't do these things, and most people would understand that. All right, this is another, we're just about out of time on this, so we'll just cover one more thing. Health, CVS stores will not sell cigarettes, since the function of a pharmacy is to promote health and cigarettes, and which endanger health. The president commends their consistency. What about hospitals and physicians that perform abortions? And that's from Monty Ledford in Aberdeen. Well, Monty, that's okay. That's not a health issue. If the mother doesn't want the baby, that's the baby's problem, not hers. All right, well, I was going to talk to you a little bit, just one more time, remind you one more time, the greatest single victory of the gay movement over the past decade has been to shift the debate from behavior to identity, thus forcing opponents into a position where they can be seen as attacking the civil rights of homosexual citizens. And that's from, you can read this book or this article, Homosexualization of America by homosexual activist Dennis Altman. Well, we're not going to get to talk about this quickly, so I'm going to tell you, look up this book, The Politically Incorrect Guide, the Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. And I tell you to look this up. It'll give you a lot of information about Islam, the true face of Islam, not the one you're going to see in the local mosque here, unless you go there. And if you speak Arabic or something, maybe you'll get it. In the meantime, maybe we'll have to cover this some more next week. In the meantime, God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a good, safe week. Join us again next week for more controversial information, and have a good, safe week. Thank you for joining us. Good night.